This is 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy and climate challenge in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. How much time do you spend thinking about your supermarket's role in the energy transition? A little less than 8 minutes? I get it. But your local supermarket may be doing a lot more than you think. Kathy Loftus of Ahold Delhaize is thinking about their own sustainability journey, as well as how to build for resiliency so that the supermarket can remain a center point of the community during times of extreme weather or power outages. From refrigeration to packaging to EV charging and storage, Kathy and I discuss a wide range of issues that are shaping the sustainable supermarket of tomorrow. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes for the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about how long it takes for me to get into my local supermarket, locate, buy, and consume an entire pint of Ben & Jerry's Chunky Monkey ice cream. Don't judge, and let's get it on. Kathy Loftus, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Paul. Glad to be here.
Kathy, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time and really excited to dive into some of the different topics with you. But before we do that, maybe a quick introduction as to yourself and your role at Ahold and in general.
Excellent. Yes. So Kathy Loftus, and I've spent a good part of my career in sustainability, although it wasn't always called sustainability back then. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, kind of charted my own course, if you will, years ago, beginning as a building engineering person, and then worked for an energy engineering company, an electric utility company, then worked for one of our largest customers with refrigeration needs, and that's a supermarket company. And there I did some pretty cool and bold things and sort of just turned that into an environmental management role, morphed that into a high-tech business development role for a couple of years, and then worked for Whole Foods Market for 14 years and ended up vice president of sustainability there. And now I work for Retail Business Services, and we are an operating company under Ahold Delhaize and ADUSA, Ahold Delhaize USA, are 5 great local brands: Hannaford, Stop and Shop, Food Lion, The Giant Company, and Giant Foods. And we've got supply chain, and we've got a couple of other operating companies as well. But we help support all of the operating companies with respect to energy and sustainability and a whole lot of other functions that really support those operating companies.
Fantastic. It's I didn't even realize that you were a mechanical engineer in your past life.
Yes, bringing that to bear now too. And I forgot to mention that my role within Retail Business Services, or RBS, is Vice President of Strategic Construction Projects. And those are some of those larger facilities that help support supply chain, for example, some automation, and then also our Energy Center of Excellence, which we're really supporting the Race to Zero, Scopes 1 and 2, and other energy functions, strategic renewables, all of that, resiliency, reliability, also process efficiency and excellence, office services, and aviation.
Fantastic. It covers a wide gamut of different emission profiles. I'm excited to dive into as many of those as we can possibly cover over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. But let's start higher and talk about supermarkets and their role within the sustainability cycle. How do you, Kathy, and broadly Ahold think about your role as a sustainable business?
That's a great question, because it covers so much ground. I mean, when you think about the buildings themselves, they contribute more than 6% of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's basically commercial buildings. So lots of different buildings do that. Supermarkets have an even higher per square foot contribution because they include refrigeration systems and other direct impacts from refrigerant gases. Most other buildings, like your typical big box retail or office buildings or others, really only have HVAC and lighting systems as their major energy sources, and they don't have always a refrigerant gas direct Scope 1 impact. So we've known for a really long time, this sector of industry has known for a really long time, that we've got an environmental footprint that we want to make sure we minimize and that we're careful about. But we've also grown over the past, couple of decades to understand much broader impacts, including packaging, like plastic bag issue versus paper bags, um, sustainably sourced seafood, different products that we sell. How can we be more sustainable? How can we bring healthier products to our customers? So it's really learning that our footprint and impacts go greater than buildings, and it's how we source certain products, how we um, help our customers understand what they can do to change their impacts. And clearly we have to be considering what our customers want, but we can also help the journey in providing awareness and some more information around what their choices can have as impacts. So it's really broad. It's for us right now with our Race to Zero for our team, we're focusing on scopes 1 and 2, but we've got a lot of folks focusing on scope 3 as well. And that, will even include working with suppliers and regenerative agriculture. And as I mentioned, sustainable packaging, all kinds of things that can reduce our scope 3 as well.
So I am excited to dive into not only the scope 3 and some of the supply chain, as well as the customer aspects of what exactly that means from an emissions perspective, as well as some of the scope 1 and scope 2 things that you've talked about as well. But you mentioned this Race to Zero. I was hoping you might be able to give the audience an overview as to what that is and maybe some of the things that you guys are thinking about with regard to that.
Yes. So several years ago, the company made a commitment, and several of our operating companies before the merger happened several years ago were working toward, the Science-Based Target Initiative and reducing our emissions over a number of years. With, Ahold Delhaize's guidance and leadership, we now have a Race to Zero goal, commitment, if you will, and it's all publicly available, by the way, on our website. But we've committed that we will be net zero by 2040. And so we have a roadmap and have been looking at all different ways to achieve that goal. And right now, high level, we've got all of the different pieces of the puzzle, if you will, in play to reach that goal. And so, yes, it encompasses a whole lot of different things that we need to do over a certain number of years. And as we all know, technology is going to catch up in some areas in a few years, but there are still some things that we can do today and this year and next year. So we're going to take it in kind of chunks, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and then we review and we project again out forward from there.
I look at my 13-year-old daughter every day and sit there and say how quickly that time passed. And I can imagine we're going to be doing the same as we start coming up against 2040.
Yes, we say that all the time, that, even though it seems like it's out there, it's going to be here before we know it.
Exactly. So you mentioned a little bit about how supermarkets themselves have unique challenges compared to other commercial buildings. I was hoping we might be able to dive a little bit into that and maybe then segue into what exactly you're doing around some of those scope 1 and scope 2 types of activities that occur at a supermarket.
Yes, so the differences, again, as we mentioned, is refrigeration and refrigerant gases. I'll highlight those first because, if you think about some of the energy codes that have been in place, some of the engineering that gets done for air conditioning units, for example, and lighting, it is fairly, and I don't mean to simplify that work, but it is fairly simple compared to designing a refrigeration system for a supermarket, especially when you've got different climate regions around the country, around the world. And then the changes with what is approved in different countries for the refrigerant gases used in those systems. So if you think your home air conditioning system or your car's air conditioning system, it's a small refrigerant gas charge. You may experience a leak at home once in a while where all of a sudden you're not getting enough cooling. So you hire the service technician who comes out and says, oh, yep, you got a leak. We can refill it. Let's hope they plug the leak too, right? Cars don't necessarily leak that much, but stores, because of all the different ways the systems are installed, and you've got vibration and you've got other issues, there can be refrigerant leaks. And when that refrigerant gas leaks, it contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. So that is something that we've got a really good handle on when we think about refrigerant leak detection systems or refrigerant management system, and moving toward the refrigerant gases that have a lower global warming potential. We call it GWP. And what the EPA has said, years ago. In fact, some of our companies were founders of the Green Chill program, which dealt with these refrigerant gases, is that we traded one environmental disaster for another. So the older refrigerants were causing ozone layer deterioration. So we switched those refrigerants out, but then the refrigerants that were used, say, in the 1990s, early 2000s, over the last couple of decades, those are what we call the high global warming potential. So they contribute more significantly to climate change. So we've got to remove those gases from our stores. The challenge is they're entrained in these systems that were designed for those gases. So we can't just plug and play, remove the gas, put a new gas in. There's all different things that have to happen to make that work correctly. So we're really dependent on our original equipment manufacturers, our refrigerant gas manufacturers, our design and engineering communities, the EPA and policymakers. There's just a whole lot of moving parts to make sure that we're doing the right thing along the timeline of a store. We can't simply change out refrigeration systems, as you can imagine. That would be very disruptive to store operations, but it's also highly costly. And in some situations, we might have an older refrigeration system in the back of a house, but we've got newer refrigerated cases within the store. So we're trying to balance asset age, environmental impact, cost of operation, and especially customer, experience all at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely sounds as though this is not something where you just shut down the store on a Tuesday, open it back up on a Wednesday, and suddenly it's net zero.
Exactly. Nope.
Fascinating. Are there other activities that you do at a store besides refrigerant in terms of trying to reach some of these different challenges? It feels like there's a tremendous amount of air handling and lighting and other things that also go into trying to operate and keep the customer experience where it is.
Yes, and so our company and several others, but really a lot of our great brands have been working toward energy efficiency for decades. In fact, one of them has received an Energy Star award every year since its inception. So the focus has been to retrofit lighting whenever possible to get it to the lowest wattage per square foot. Most of our stores are LED right now. We've also added doors on refrigerated and frozen cases. We're looking at employing variable speed drives across refrigeration and HVAC systems, adding some night setback controls to our operation of the air handling units, as you mentioned, the rooftop units. So really doing as much as we can tactically and whatever is available, in many cases with help from utility incentive programs. And now we're taking that to the next level and using what we would call not quite AI, artificial intelligence, but high-level technologies, including sub-metering where possible, but otherwise using algorithmic predictability from set points within the stores to really have a near real-time view into how our store is using energy and when, so that we can change the load profile when we need to. We can optimize our refrigeration and HVAC set points so that they are truly operating as efficiently as possible. And then we can catch if something's about to fail or if there's something that is causing an energy exception. We can see that more readily and act on it more readily to reduce energy consumption, thereby reducing emissions.
So that's interesting because it's not only a mechanism to reduce emissions, but get out in front of some of these different, predictive maintenance opportunities to make certain that you're in front of any potential problems, leaks, or anything like that, I imagine.
Absolutely. And that helps too, because we can start to see that correlation between energy consumption, maintenance costs, refrigerant levels, and start to see maybe there's a point at which it makes sense to replace an asset. And it might be a little sooner than some people think. And clearly we want our assets to live as long as possible. That's part of sustainability too.
Yep.
But there comes a time when it may be that even if we don't necessarily replace that system, that we've got to retrofit it, repurpose it, use it in a wise fashion. Or if we do replace it, let's re-engineer. We may not need to replace it one for one. We could potentially replace it with either a smaller system or a different type of technology that is more efficient or adapts better to the new refrigerant gases.
Yeah, yeah. So you touch upon a subject there that I would love to dive into, because I imagine one of the challenges that you have to scaling some of the sustainability initiatives that you have is the fact that you already have a set of assets out there that have a life expectancy to them and a depreciation cycle to them, et cetera, that they're working fine, and you don't necessarily have as much incentive to replace them today, absent, them hitting the end of life cycle. How do you guys think about that?
That's a really good question, Paul. And I think, we've thought about that so many ways. And, it isn't as simple as when you retrofit a piece of equipment for a more efficient equipment. And then sometimes you get an incentive, which helps, maybe companies that don't want to invest in something that has a payback longer than a certain time frame. In the supermarket industry, margins are thin. We have to be very careful and be stewards of our assets and finances. So when we think about trying to replace an asset that is not near the end of its useful life and it hasn't been fully depreciated, we've got to have a really strong reason to do that. And what we think of is, first, let's try to replace part of the system, right? And do some fit for purpose changes so that we're not necessarily, removing an asset that still has useful life. So we're really just looking at all of the different balancing factors for what is left on that piece of equipment, trying to put a business case together for especially meeting our goal. That is, number one, but we've got to do it in such a way that we're pulling the levers that make sense at specific times so that we optimize, all of the different options and cycles of equipment life.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like not only do you have the life expectancy of these assets to worry about, you've got the customer experience and making certain that that's not impacted. You've got the turnover, of different, projects within a facility that you need to time out, et cetera. It seems like there's a lot of challenges trying to reach this 2040 goal of yours.
Yeah, there are. And we've been talking to utilities. We're trying to get out in front with a lot of different, I guess you could say, sectors of industry, policymakers, our peers, for example, the design and engineering community, the service provider communities, to really, it's going to take coalitions. It's going to take a lot of collaboration to get a lot of this work done. And when we think about electrification, for example, and adding renewables into the mix, in the past, it was a really long time cycle to get renewables. We've got the utility interconnect process, you've got permitting and siting, you've got development costs. Now we have huge supply chain, not just for our sector, but all across, challenges there. Lead times for electrical equipment are significant these days, as well as refrigeration. But so there are all those other things too, just outside of our buildings, that we've got to be cognizant of and try to work with and influence folks to modify some of those policies and some of those manufacturing plans and other factors so that we can actually solve this in the time that we are committed to.
Yeah, I like the way that you think about that in terms of building the coalition of companies that can come together and not think about them just within their individual silos. Certainly we spend a lot of time thinking about renewable energy and the project related challenges they have, not only from a supply chain perspective, but also in terms of permitting, getting them into the interconnection queue and trying to get these projects that have a stable economic base actually turned on and energized. And certainly if you're thinking about them individually, and thinking about each of the individual steps in a silo, nothing gets done, right? So I can fully appreciate some of the challenges that you have.
Yes, absolutely. And it's exciting because I think we're going to make some significant strides, and we will follow some, but we're going to bring others along. And I think we have similar experiences along the scope 3 and customer interface kind of opportunities.
That was where I was going to go next, was as you talk about building some of these coalitions and these challenges, I wanted to know how your suppliers fit into that equation. Scope 3, just so the audience remembers, Scope 3 is really measuring the emissions that exist within a supply chain. So getting the product to the market in the first place, as also with how the consumer uses that product in the future. So, the example I use is an oven, a home oven. If it's a natural gas oven, you're going to continue to emit emissions as a customer. Whereas if you ship to an induction oven and you electrify that, you can have some more impact around your emissions. So, Kathy, how do you think about where the supplier? Let's start with the suppliers. Where do they fit into this equation?
So they fit in because we want to make sure that what they are doing and providing meets with our expectations and our goals. And so but again, we can't direct them necessarily to do what we think is absolutely correct. What we want to do and how we start is by meeting with as many as possible. And as you can imagine, we have quite a number of suppliers, so it might not be feasible to meet with all of them at any given time, but the largest suppliers, we meet with them, we ask, what are your programs, what are you doing? And we're also trying to influence sort of how they use energy, what type of packaging are they using. We can make decisions, especially with own label and things like that, where we have that in our control. So it is truly bringing that part of our business into our fold and what we need, and then working with them, but others as well. We simply can't be the only entity that drives them to work in such a way that meets our goals and meets some of these other high level goals from some companies. The whole industry has to participate. And so it goes from consumer goods companies to even some of the smaller companies, but how do we really share with them what our goals are, what we expect from them, and then how do we make changes when we need to. There's a lot to consider, and especially when you think about, again, which of those products and systems that we rely on have the largest environmental emissions. And so how do we then start to think about our communication with our customers and our influence and sharing with them how some products have a higher footprint than others? Just, here's how, if you have this information, and we can use labeling communication within the stores, if you have this information, you may change your product mix at home. So a lot of that kind of learning now and meeting with suppliers and helping our customers to understand what the different product mix is and how their choices can make a different impact as well.
It's fascinating to hear how you've pulled that thread through from suppliers to the customer and providing some of that labeling to the customer so that they can make their choices as well. Again, we're staying within the Scope 3 emissions bucket, if you will, but here you've connected the types of products that customers are purchasing that could be more sustainable.
Absolutely. I mean, when we think about it, you hear all every now and then how, with the cows and methane and other, products, the meat and dairy industry absolutely are, areas that have higher emissions, but some of those suppliers are working differently to reduce the impact. And some of it could be, okay, look at this type of farming, look at this type of production. Other could be, how about if we reduce that consumption as well? So there's definitely layers of making those changes, and then communicating the benefits.
So, Kathy, as we think about scope three and the supply chain and the emissions that they have, and then the delivery of those goods, products to your supermarket, how do you think about that challenge? Either around the electrification of that delivery, or even for that matter, customers coming to your store. How does Kathy think about that?
Yeah, so especially with my background and knowing the whole resiliency, reliability of electric systems and grids. And in the past, it's all about portfolio when we think about it, right? We can't simply all convert to an electric fleet at this time for a myriad of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, the utilities tell us, they don't have as much capacity available immediately. So we think about we'd have to electrify a building to be able to charge those large tractor trailers and even the last mile vehicles. The last mile vehicle may not be such a challenge. However, we still have to think if we're a location within a development that has a specific amount of capacity from the electric distribution and transmission system, adding all kinds of electric vehicle charging to those locations requires additional capacity, both in generation, transmission, and distribution at those locations.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be huge, but it's significant. Now we talk about the large tractor trailers. There are so many challenges with those because it's trying to have those charges last long enough for those over the highway trips. But then it's, again, where are they going to charge? And the infrastructure to charge those is significant. So while we know it's an honorable goal, it's a goal we need to get to, we need, again, that coalition of folks to really understand the challenges and help us move that technology. And that's the truck manufacturers, it's the utility companies, it's policymakers. We've really got to work on that. And communities too need to understand the changes that will come with electric fleets. The final thing I think I'll say there is, as we all know, the challenges of technology hacks and other concerns around reliability. If we were to be electrified everywhere and a regional grid goes out, or even a local distribution feed goes out, that's going to have tremendous impacts on delivery and other. So I think it's really trying to figure out how these risks and costs and benefits are all going to be identified correctly and then solved.
Yeah. So you're challenged with not only reducing the emissions across all the different scopes, but actually thinking about it from a resiliency perspective as well, in terms of not just exposing yourself to a grid that may go down, either due to a hack or a weather event or whatever it might be, really thinking through those challenges as well, huh?
Absolutely. And so that brings us back to the customer again, too. And where we've been trying to work for years with our state and local grocery associations and Food Marketing Institute, the Edison Electric Institute, and its utility membership is showing that link between supermarkets and the community. And so in years past, it was the supermarkets could maybe stay open for a little longer to provide water and some foods, and then they may or may not have enough backup generation, for example, to keep a couple of refrigerated cases and coolers running through an outage. But it was still a backbone of the community for customers. Now we think of it is beyond that, even such that it's a gathering place for folks to get their news, to charge their vehicles, especially charge their phones to keep in communication. So you think about the wildfires years ago in California when folks had to evacuate within a second. Maybe they had their phone, but they didn't think of getting their charger. Where are they going? And then how are they going to keep in communication with people? So we've got to figure out, again, ways to work closely together to understand the impacts, not only on emissions longer term, but on solving community needs immediately and near term.
That is fascinating, and I love the way that you phrased a whole bunch of that, Kathy. It also lends itself towards probably my last series of questions here, where the supermarket industry, as it's challenged with some of these sustainability and community benefit and resiliency questions, and you touched on this a little bit just in terms of the challenges around fleet electrification and pulling off some of the I'll use your words from earlier, some of the easier efforts today, not easy, but easier efforts today. Where's the supermarket industry going? Like, what do you see, 10, 15, let's see, we're 17 years away from 2040, 17 years down the line. How is the supermarket of tomorrow changing because of some of these pressures?
I like to think that the supermarket of tomorrow has a play in either fractal or microgrids in the communities where there may be some public-private policy or incentives too for us to be able to avail ourselves of not only on-site clean renewable generation, but also storage to support if the grid goes down. So, and again, it is for a number of those reasons we talked about: reliability, safety, providing sustenance to our customers and communities. So I'm hoping that there's a circularity to all of this as well, where communities understand where their products are coming from, where their electricity mix is coming from, where their deliveries come from, and there's more of an awareness and an understanding of why we've all got to work together to make the grocery of the future a more sustainable and reliable experience. And some of that might mean we do things in conjunction with other building owners, that we provide additional options. We love to think about all of the different ways we can deliver products and services to our customers. And it won't always be potentially at that building. It may be through other mechanisms as well.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And do you see, as the backbone of the community, do you see this coalition and this collaborative effort being key to getting things done?
I do. And I had some ideas in the past about this, and fortunately there were some organizations that had interest in this, and so did, a main public broadcasting channel, for instance, did an award-winning Emmy show on, how supermarkets work to deliver for their customers, but how they can also be this kind of environmental and sustainable, reliable force in the community. So if there are ways for us to partner with academia or public service announcements, other ways of communication channels, and then take it to policy, take it to our equipment manufacturers, take it to the utility companies, and all of the different larger, agriculture, energy, all of those sectors of industry, to really try to get a stakeholder model and approach to learning what all of the different concerns are from customers on up, and or should I say customers down, but all of the different, areas that we really got to start to weave into how we design and build and deliver for the future.
Kathy, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing some of the different things that you're doing and that the broader Ahold, I'm going to butcher the second part of that name, Delhaize?
Delhaize.
Yep. All right. How Ahold Delhaize is thinking about sustainability, their role within the community, the way that they're challenged to make some of these things happen. Thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing some of the perspectives.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Paul. It was a pleasure.